Hi everyone and welcome to Hit the Apex. It's the week following the Australian Grand Prix. We've got that to wrap up for you this week and also plenty of other news making the rounds in the world of sport in general. I'm Jawad, as always, joined by Baden, and we blinked and another Australian Grand Prix is already gone, and so begins F1 2018.
Yeah, I think mixed emotions. It was a great weekend whilst it lasted. But for all that build-up, once again, you get back to reality and you don't even realise that it occurred in the first place.
Yeah, as I said, blink and you'll miss it, and it just feels that way heading back into the normal working week this week. But anyway, let's talk about the race and the weekend as a whole. Great weekend, except for the fact that the rain sort of washed things out a bit on Saturday. That wasn't very pleasant at all. But as far as the race itself is concerned, yeah, Sebastian Vettel making it back-to-back wins here in Australia. Strategy masterstroke, you could say, or he lucked into it, of course.
Opportunistic at the least.
Opportunistic indeed, and it was the curse of pole position that struck Lewis Hamilton once again. He claimed his sixth pole position here in Australia, equaling that record that Ayrton Senna set back when they had the Grand Prix in Adelaide, but he ended up losing that lead under the safety car, which was brought out because of a double retirement, a heartbreaking double retirement by the Haas cars, who were fourth and fifth at the time. It was exactly the same pit stop fumble that destroyed the team's possibility for their best ever result, and that was, as much as that was pretty heartbreaking, it was the opportunity there for Sebastian Vettel to finally come into the pits on lap 27, make his stop, and because the field was neutralised with the safety car, all the drivers basically had to go around slowly, and as a result it gave Vettel the time he needed to come back from his pit stop into the lead, and Hamilton afterwards was spewing, and rightly so.
Yeah, we look at it, and early on Vettel probably didn't have the pace. If anything, Kimi Räikkönen seemed more comfortable. He made that half effort into turn 3 there to go around the outside of Hamilton, but in the end probably the wrong move to make, and about 2.5 seconds behind initially, and it seems as though Vettel, purely from the timing there, he's lucked into a victory when really Kimi Räikkönen probably overshadowed, and he had quite a good race overall, it must be said. So both he and Hamilton probably lost out.
Yeah, well, Kimi and Lewis, both on the team radio, were not very happy about a lot of things during the race. Kimi saying, don't F me over this again with the strategy. You're telling him now and whatnot, so who knows, we're probably in for the same sort of situation we had last year with the Ferraris, and how Sebastian Vettel was their number one guy. But Lewis Hamilton, just all race, if you want to go for the whole weekend, he was pretty grumpy all weekend from what was being said, and even just looking at him, his general demeanour as well, he just didn't seem happy about things. Who knows? He's the reigning world champion. I thought he would be quite happy with that, but came out in qualifying and pretty much blew the rest of the competition out of the water with party mode indeed, yeah, which then in the press conference afterwards there was a joke, Seb saying, you can party today, Lewis, but me and Kimi will be partying tomorrow, referring to the race, and indeed Lewis was left mincing on his words because Ferrari with Kimi and Seb were indeed partying Sunday night with the win, and also third place for Kimi Räikkönen as well, who you said had a clean race. He was quick in that first part of the race, but then when Vettel took the lead, he basically was relegated to having a lonely affair in third. But he had a bit of company with Daniel Ricciardo towards the end of the race, and Ricciardo, I guess, another missed opportunity for him to finish on the podium at home. He started in 8th as a result of a 3-place grid penalty for driving under the speed limit or whatever during the red flag in one of the practice sessions earlier on. So that was a bit of a Mickey Mouse penalty, you could say, and starting the race from 8th, he made his way back up to 4th. There was that hope that he would be able to pass Kimi Räikkönen, but I guess one of the big talking points from this race is the lack of overtaking and the fact that despite the improvements from last year, these cars are still very hard to follow each other, and perhaps it could be circuit specific. We'll see when we get to Bahrain, but certainly here in Albert Park, it was very difficult for Ricciardo to try and get past Räikkönen.
Yeah, again, the knee-jerk reaction after one race, everyone's quick to soil Melbourne when the truth couldn't be further away. We've had some great overtaking, really, until probably the start of the hybrid era. It was one of the most dramatic on the calendar there, and you can see there was talk coming into this season of some minor alterations, and perhaps it's something to still think on, but I think we again need to see at least the flyaway events where it all settles out before there's any definitive moves made. And as it was, Daniel Ricciardo there, you could argue that the way he did charge through to really only a couple of seconds off P2, he arguably would have been outright second without that penalty. He would have lined up in fifth. So it's really encouraging to see the Red Bulls, without getting the podium finishes we had talked about in the lead up to the race, that they really look like they've got a really competitive car there. And if anything, with Max Verstappen, we'll touch on in a moment there, he really butchered an opportunity himself to be on that podium.
Yeah, exactly. Going to Max Verstappen now, of course, he started from fourth but ended up dropping to sixth. He had that little moment at turn one where he spun the car pretty gracefully, of course, but managed to spin the right way around again. But, of course, for the rest of the race, we found out after the race that he was effectively driving a car that was broken, so it was a good effort from him to get back to sixth, and he was stuck there behind one of the McLarens we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, missed opportunity for Red Bull there from Verstappen's point of view, and I guess is this aggressiveness that we've seen from Verstappen all the time? Is he going to mature at some point? I guess first race of the season, don't want to read too much into it, yeah, but what you said about the Red Bulls having good pace at the moment, yeah, we should be seeing him in the mix for podiums, and if they were perhaps in that position that Vettel was when he went in for the pit stop, then perhaps we could have had a Red Bull win here in Melbourne over the weekend. So encouraging from Red Bull there. They're still, I guess, ahead of the rest of the other competitors, except for Ferrari and Mercedes. We'll go to fifth place here. It was a Red Bull versus McLaren fight, and Fernando Alonso winning that one, I guess. I mean, Verstappen having issues with his car, but still, it was good to see these two guys fighting wheel to wheel, because that was what the whole talk was about over the preseason, that with the same engine in the car now, it'll be a test of the chassis, and in this situation, McLaren was able to win in race trim, but in qualifying trim, the Red Bull's still much quicker.
Yeah, you can see with McLaren, they get a complete weekend together, and it's a very handy package there, and Alonso always maximising those opportunities. So it's probably not the most 100% realistic outlook of what's to come through the season, but just as far as optimism to see such an iconic name back in the points, it just shows you that when they get their head around, again, the Renault package at full integration, it's always going to take some time, but if that's we're top fives, it's not podiums and victories that everyone wants to see McLaren at, but it's certainly a good starting point. And for Red Bull, really, who knows? Like, the whole weekend you come away and Mercedes is undoubtable that they've still got the car to beat, and they had the software bug, which we'll probably mention shortly, whether that was an excuse or not. But I think that behind Red Bull, behind Ferrari, then you got Haas there, misfortune, which we mentioned, McLaren gnawing away, and they've come a long way in that off-season.
Yeah, well, we'll see when in the next race whereabouts Haas actually are when they actually finish a race. Unfortunate again with what happened to them, and Kevin Magnussen running fourth, Romain Grosjean fifth. Could they have had a podium? I mean, that's just a lot of questions that we shouldn't bother asking now at this stage in hindsight. But going back to McLaren, double points finish for them. Alonso fifth, Stoffel Van Dorn ninth as well, and giving McLaren their best results since, in Australia since 2014 when they had that double podium finish. And I guess it's a solid way for them to start the season. If this is what we can expect from them every race, then yeah, fourth is easily achievable for them in the Constructors' Championship. You'd think that at some stage they'd be able to pick up a consolation podium perhaps, but they've already said coming out in the first race that their target is to reach Red Bull by the end of the season, which you think with a whole season ahead of you, 20 races to go, it is achievable depending on how their development goes and everything. But, they're still under the scrutiny. They're still under the pump because they've come out and boldly said that, with the better power unit, we should be able to be back at the front because we've had the best chassis all along. And they don't want to be left mincing on their words in regards to that. So, but we've also heard too that I guess some of the problems that they had over testing was to do with the fact that McLaren's packaging is so tight, and the Renault power unit is a much larger unit than the Honda was. The Honda was compressed so much to be able to fit into the McLaren, and I guess that had caused some of the problems that they had on the reliability front.
Well, you think back even to a few years ago with Adrian Newey's notoriously tight packages, and in contrast to Renault being a bit more cumbersome, then you could say that it's a familiar theme there. It's probably going to need to be a bit more accommodating if they want to really marry the chassis to the power units.
Yeah, so, it's nice to have that tight packaging at the rear, specifically for aerodynamics and all that. So that'll be interesting to see how things pan out. I mean, there was a bit of a worry at the start of the weekend when in the first practice session we hardly saw any of the McLarens out on track. It was a glorious sunny day. I was sitting there trackside and wanting to see those papaya orange McLarens go past, but we didn't really see them at all. And second practice as well, we saw a little bit of them. But yeah, come third practice, it was... they were able to get their act together, and qualifying, they just missed out on the top 10 shootout, which was, fair effort to them, but, they were beaten by the Haas guys, the Renault guys, so I guess those are the two teams we can expect them to be fighting all season, as far as qualifying is concerned, and then in the races, it will come down to who's got the better, sequence on the day. Alonso, we know qualifying's not been a strength of his in the past few years. Even in the latter years at Ferrari, he was
P5 was synonymous with everything.
Yeah, so he wasn't really qualifying near the front, but would end up winning races, getting podiums, and now, here qualifying outside the top 10, he was able to race to 5th. So, if this is the kind of results we can get from Alonso and Van Dorn as well, solid job from him, then it's a good season to look forward to. But going on, there was no big comeback from Valtteri Bottas, who we had that crash in qualifying where he just went on the curb and got the tank slapper and whatnot and completely wrecked the car. Gearbox penalty overnight, started from P15 and finished in 8th. So, I guess that was probably a little disappointing, but, with a lot of fast cars ahead of him, it would have been more difficult for him to have made further progress.
And Lewis Hamilton probably bemoaning that he probably could have used the leverage if Bottas had have inserted himself second or even third on the grid, if not ahead of Raikkonen. And from the start of the race, certainly for Vettel, it would have been a handy buffer to have there, so that probably did compromise him slightly. Not that we can make any excuses for Mercedes' inability to convert for a victory.
Exactly, and I guess this is where some of the pressure will come on to Bottas as well at the start of the year, where it's a big year as far as driver movement will be concerned for next year, and a lot of talk that Bottas is probably not favourite to retain that seat, and that, with other big names on the market, Mercedes might try and target them, so he's got to do a lot to keep his seat in as far as in the public's eyes are concerned. But, he had a great year last year, first year with Mercedes. He won 3 races, of course. Was it 3 or 2?
3, won the third at Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, so he had a few victories to his name. He was able to score pole positions, and he was quick a lot of the time. So, it's going to be an interesting year for Bottas, but, not the best start for him. I think it was his worst finish here since at
least since Williams joined up with Mercedes. His first season maybe he was off the pace.
Yeah,
but certainly Williams, Mercedes onwards, he's been always around that top 5 mark.
Exactly. So and I guess this was his worst finish since he came to Mercedes as well. So that was very interesting to read. But moving it on, double points finish for Renault as well, who had a bit of a quiet race, you could say. We didn't really hear much from them. Hulkenberg, P7, good result for him. And a very ill Carlos Sainz, as we learned, was lucky to hang on to 10th in the end because he had a drinks bottle malfunction.
Some were saying he was being waterboarded.
Yeah,
essentially just getting saturated in too much fluid. So that was a bit of a novelty, but F1 always throws up those really rare situations you wouldn't hear about too frequently.
Oh, well, yeah, he almost vomited in the car, he said, or in his helmet, something like that. So, yeah, 10th for him at least. So, good start to the season with them with points. And I guess this is the first time that Renault in a while have scored double points in Australia as well. So, two solid drivers there to look out for all year. And again, it'll depend on their development and to see how far they can go up the table.
Yeah, I think really, again, such an outlier at Melbourne in tandem with the talk about overtaking. It's just such an early phase of the championship that we've got to let it all settle down. But the signs are there that those, I guess, retirements from Haas, we know that they've got more to give, and Mercedes probably the team to beat despite being second, that otherwise there's going to be a few more things, more in the midfield, that have really got to shake themselves out.
Yeah, exactly. And depending on when upgrades and that come as well, that'll probably sort the field out a lot more. But moving it down now, and we had some unfortunate retirements, quite a few casualties throughout the race, and we already said the Haas cars were out. But a sandwich bag, believe it or not, ended Sergei Sirotkin's race debut quite early. It was really early in the race, I think third or fourth lap that we saw him pull over to the side and was out. And it was great seeing Sirotkin this weekend. A lot of criticism around his appointment there at Williams, but there were times where he was a lot quicker than his teammate Lance Stroll, who of course who's had a whole season under his belt. And in qualifying until the final moment of Q1, I thought Sirotkin had Stroll in the bag, but excuse the bag pun there. I thought he had him in the bag, but then, Stroll was able to pull out a lap at the 11th hour to get himself into Q2. That would have been disastrous if both Williams were knocked out in Q1, but I guess it's going to be par for the course this season. We can't really expect them to be where they were a couple of years ago, Q3 guarantee. But Lance Stroll ended up finishing the race in 14th. He was outraced by another rookie, Charles Leclerc, on debut, had an error-free race in a arguably more uncompetitive car than the Williams. So good result there from the rookie to do that. And a lot of, I guess, attention on Leclerc as well, being the Ferrari junior driver. And he's got to get those results to show that he's going to be a driver for the future for Ferrari.
Yeah, I think Williams' result speaks to its decision to take on these two younger drivers, and they can't be too unrealistic with its expectations across the season. Maybe they're going to just be picking up those minor points rather than cracking the top fives that we're being accustomed to, and a lonely race for Lance Stroll ultimately making up the numbers. And Charles Leclerc, he did all he could, really. Sauber, they were well off the pace really up until race day, and Marcus Ericsson, indeed his teammate, was quite gutted when he retired early on. So it's pleasing to see that they still feel that they can do something on a Sunday, even if the outright speed isn't there to do a lot in qualifying. But even so, there was some good pace again from Ericsson during qualifying, and Leclerc late in the piece. They managed to show that they can get a good lap together, and maybe being opportunistic, we can still expect them to pick up a point here or there.
Yeah, you might see at some point in the season one of them get out of Q1, you'd think, in circumstances. Hopefully in the dry they can, just string together that lap to get them out there. Another team that I guess will struggle to see their way out of Q1 this season will be Toro Rosso. Same old outcome for Honda now, with Toro Rosso with that engine failure for Pierre Gasly. And one of our mates was on the ground at turn 15 saying that, when the Gasly's car went past with the engine blown, it left a very awful odour in the air as well. And I'm like, yep, okay, same old story then this year. And Brendan Hartley finishing a lap down as well, despite having unlapped himself during the safety car, just shows you how far behind they still are in terms of the pace. Disappointing, I guess, with Gasly, because they were basically bulletproof in testing as far as reliability was concerned. They didn't show any problems or any failures, and now first race of a season where we've got 3 power units that need to last the year, and he's already lost an engine there. So, we're going to be seeing grid penalties again, and we saw these two in particular, Hartley and Gasly, at the end of last year when they made their Toro Rosso debuts with the Renault power unit, were suffering from grid penalties as well. So I guess, what can we expect from them?
Just shows when the wicks paperwork's turned up that Honda's still wanting, and again,
Just shakes itself to bits.
Could be another season of torment, but thank God for McLaren, they're out, they'll be thinking, and I guess they've solved their teething issues through the testing, and they're looking on the improve. So now the ball's probably in Red Bull's court to see what they make of Honda in the next few months, and they've got a decision to make regarding its own future for 2019 on the power unit front.
Well, Helmut Marko, didn't he say before the race that, before the weekend, in fact, that he reckons Honda will be on the same level as Renault by the end of the season. So that's a lot of progress to make still. I mean that was considering what they had done in testing. It's like, okay, they've got a reliable engine now. Let's just try and make it quicker. But the fact is that they've just gone and blown the engine in the first race, means that there's still reliability issues to be worked on. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Moving it back up, Force India finishing outside of the points with Perez ahead of Ocon. I guess, what do we expect from them for the rest of the season until they get their upgrades? We know that they're in a bit of a financial situation
if
again.
They even can get the upgrades if the funds come through.
It's basically dependent on the money now, whether they can get enough funding to get those upgrades on the car. But, they're behind the 8 ball, which is not good to see. But we knew that coming into this season with the likes of McLaren and Renault and Haas making improvements, that it would be difficult for Force India on the shoestring budget that they have to maintain that 4th position that they've deservedly achieved over the last few years. So I reckon perhaps, if they can get those upgrades on the car, they could perhaps mix it again in the points. But, beating Renault, McLaren, it's going to be a bit difficult this year. And I guess we're just going to have to see how the individuals fare. Ocon's going to be battling again with Perez. We saw how heated things got last year between the two, and for minor points placings, are these guys going to do the same thing? It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, or maybe this year's going to be a bit of a write-off till the future is resolved. All that talk of a name change and new majority investors there, so that's been put on the back burner for now. So if they can at least get through this season, just picking up some points and a handy haul towards its allowance income from the constructors that can go towards 2019, just having a future where they know exactly which direction they're headed in.
Yeah, exactly. So it just, as you said, doesn't seem like that we're going to have any news on the name change this year now. So perhaps next year we'll wait and see. Still a lot of water to go under the bridge, but it's a team that have long struggled. They made the most of it over the last couple of seasons and went above and beyond. But yeah, to see them fall back again, it's kind of like that Williams thing where when they taste success, they've done so well. You don't want to see them go backwards, and I guess they've just got to work towards this rebrand or whatever and getting a bit of money back into the team. And it's not about that they're doing anything wrong. They've got the right people there on the technical department. They've got the right leaders, Bob Fernley and Otmar Zafnauer as well. So it just comes down to having those resources on hand to be able to execute what they want.
Yeah, it's always precarious, F1 week to week, and then situations change and suddenly the outlook can be a whole lot brighter, but we hope for them. We want as many cars on the grid as we can, and we want them being competitive. Exactly,
like Haas are. So just rounding it out, I guess, going back to what we said earlier about the lack of overtaking being lamented by many over the weekend, and of course a lot of people have just come out of the gates and started criticising the race itself, saying that is Albert Park outdated now and stuff like that. It's not a very easy thing to digest. Of course, it's not anything to do with the circuit itself. At some circuits you're going to be able to pass, others you're not going to, and I guess you could compare it to Monaco perhaps. Monaco's been around for a long time. We're not going to see much overtaking there, but what we've got to work towards is getting cars that will allow overtaking. I guess we knew coming into this new era of aerodynamics last year that overtaking would be a lot more difficult, but we still saw overtaking last year at certain circuits, and then certain circuits you're not going to see as much overtaking. So as you say, just people getting a bit too carried away quite easily
Yeah, hard to put the onus on the circuits when they're the constant and the aerodynamics always varying. So I'd say that you're going to have to get used to it for the next 3 seasons at least, until the 2021 regulations do come online and there's a real effort made to make these cars, in a way, I guess, with talk of the budget cap, that still makes them friendly for good passing. Then it's just playing the long game, and Melbourne really for the entire show again put on a great week, and it's just a shame that more can't be done on track, but it shouldn't take away from what the circuit provides, that carnival atmosphere, and we'll again wait and see the next couple of races if the feedback is the same.
Yeah, so great job again from the organisers for putting on such a great event. They probably didn't draw in the numbers that they had hoped for initially. I think 295,000 people for the whole weekend, so it was actually down on last year's number, but
Saturday
I guess
wiped out about 90,000.
Yeah, you could say so. So if we didn't have the rain on Saturday, I'm sure that we would have broken a new record this year. But anyway, that's another race, Australian Grand Prix over. We look forward to Bahrain then next week. But anyway, before we round that out, drivers of the day as always. Hard to go past Fernando Alonso for me. I can see him picking up this little award I can see him picking up this award on many occasions this year. As we said before, the car might not be top 3 worthy, but he, with his superhuman ability or whatever, might be able to snag a top 3 out of the car, and to finish 5th ahead of a Red Bull as well with Max Verstappen behind the wheel. I'm sure he'll be happy to be in that position again where he gets to fight with the top guys on the grid.
Yeah, I'd be close to nominating the Spaniard, but it's hard to go past Daniel Ricciardo there. Just from the setback he had, he was seething after that penalty, and he made the most of it. He didn't feel the pressure like Max Verstappen did, and that fastest lap he set in the dying stages there, he was really hungry, and had things work out a little bit better, probably was staring at a P2, and I think that it's a make or break season for him, so he's got a lot there to prove, and I think that it just shows you that he's pretty relentless. When he wants something, he won't hold back at all.
Exactly. So yeah, that rounds out our little review of the Australian Grand Prix. Let's get into our digest then for the week, and a lot of news coming out obviously after the Grand Prix and during the weekend, and in regards to Haas actually. So even though they weren't able to convert and get the points that they needed at the end of the weekend with the twin retirement, there's still a lot of concern being raised about how similar the car is this year to Ferrari, and in particular last year's Ferrari car. People have come out and said that it might be an exact replica of what Ferrari raced last year. Guys like Zach Brown and the team at Force India are not happy, saying that, in the regulations that's not allowed. They're not supposed to be sharing that sort of information between teams. I mean, we know how close that Ferrari are with Haas as far as a technical partnership is concerned, with the power unit and other components such as suspension and brakes and all that. But yeah, how close is too close?
Yeah, it's probably a good thing, again, for them to resolve ahead of the next agreement, 2020, whether it's something to be embraced as far as cost-cutting measures, or it needs to be just completely clarified and everyone has to have their independent autonomy there. But Haas, for what it is worth, they've shown that within the parameters there of the regulations, that they've maximised it, and they've been very inconsistent, at least in 2017. So if they have the kind of pace that they displayed on Sunday, then they're really going to be up there, and perhaps they'll be the ones contending for podiums. So you've got to hand it to them. They've probably unearthed what they can and worked their way around loopholes, and other teams, again, the knee-jerk reaction when they see that someone does something well, the first act is to go and protest rather than make their own effort to make those inroads.
Well, you could say that again, and we heard that over Saturday night after qualifying, where Kevin Magnussen basically told Fernando Alonso to stop complaining just because we're faster than you. So, it's, as you say, knee-jerk reaction, and we just got to wait and see how things pan out. I guess with the outcome that they had in the race, it sort of was put down by that, but, come the next race, Bahrain, they did really well at over the last couple of years. That's where I think their best result actually came in 2016 with Grosjean finishing in 5th. So, if they were in that same position again, 4th and 5th, then who knows what we could actually have a protest on our hands between the guys.
Yeah, it's just good to see again a bit of variety there. Renault, a bit more consistency. McLaren, when it's got everything sorted. So any given weekend, we could have somebody different chipping away at those front runners. And when one or two of them have issues like we saw with Bottas and then Verstappen really not maximising it, then it's just great to see a different team in the mix.
Yeah, and going back to what you said then and moving on to the next point about, looking ahead to the future. So Liberty Media are going to sit down with the teams in Bahrain to present a blueprint of the future, so the regulations beyond 2021, not just the regulations, but just their general vision of how they want to see the sport. I guess a decision's got to be made, or, they've got to finalise things in the next few months so that preparation can begin, of course. And remember, with the 2014 engine regulations, they were talking about them as early as 2011 or 12, I think. So
would have been even earlier than that. Probably would have been like 2010 when
they
really started discussing the hybrid concept.
Yeah, so they're going to have to get onto that early. They've got to nail down what they want from an engine perspective, power unit. We believe that hybrid is still the way to go for the future. But as far as their aerodynamics are concerned and whatnot as well, there's going to be a lot of power play, I guess. But, this is where Liberty's got to put their foot on the ground, stamp their authority and say, if you want to play ball, that's good. If you don't, well, then there's the door. You can leave. So
I think Liberty, they've come in for some flack after that honeymoon period concluded. Probably mid-season 2017, people started to turn on them, and we've seen the introduction of the new graphics set and the streaming service, which is taking its time, but they're wanting to do it right, and Liberty just has to go and show that they're certain of what it wants as its own future and own the decision, so people aren't sitting there thinking these guys don't have a clue what they're doing.
Yeah, I guess that criticism is going to be natural, of course, with anything, and, Formula One's at that point where, evolution is good. We've had the same thing for so many years now, and just giving it that fresh new look. And now I guess they've done that on the aesthetic side of things. They've just got to make the racing product itself quality standard, I guess, and that's what 2021 will be. And whether the teams are going to agree with them or not, who cares, to be honest, because there'll always be someone who's willing to compete in the sport. If Ferrari want to go, they can go. Not that they will anyway, for those who think that their threats are genuine. There's too much money in it for them. It's their form of advertising. They need Formula One, but Formula One doesn't really need Ferrari, so read into that what you will.
It's the perennial debate with Ferrari and the idea that it sells itself through its own presence in the sport, whereas everyone else has to do it for pure survival reasons. But if F1 really and Liberty wants to show who really is in charge, then they won't have any time for Ferrari to call the shots.
Exactly. So moving it on anyway, and Liberty Media and F1 announced last week as well that the sport's going to be getting the Netflix treatment. So there's going to be a series coming in 2019, early 2019, which will be documenting this season, giving great insight into the teams and the drivers and weaving a narrative around the season, which will be 2018. It's only just started, so we don't know what to expect. So that's really great. And, we saw Grand Prix Driver, the series that McLaren made for Amazon over the off-season, about their their pre-season from last year. It was a 4-part series, but really insightful as to what went on in what was, I guess, that tumultuous, what was to be that tumultuous season, the final season with Honda. So, I guess, just opening that up to audiences. I mean, Netflix is such a universal platform now. Opening it up to audiences to see what really goes on inside the world of Formula One and, the tension, the pressure, the drama, and all that sort of thing. It's hard not to be excited about it, and I wish we already had something to sample.
Yeah, we just got to be patient. Good things come to those who wait, and Liberty will make sure it gets it right when it does have its release, and it's probably a sign that a lot more teams and motorsport as a whole will get around it and have its own content out there that really is tailored towards its fans for the increased exposure.
Well, we did make the comparison that they have here in Australia on Fox Sports or whatever, Supercars Life, which is a behind-the-scenes program that goes into the lives of the drivers and their families and all that sort of thing, and shows what it is, all the preparation that goes into what they do off track as well. So that's excellent insight, and it's just opens their world up a lot. You know, Formula One drivers for a long time now have been, or the world of Formula One in general has been really exclusive, and you can't you can't see on the inside. But now with Liberty Media, you know, we're starting to get that door open, and you can see what goes on inside and everything. And a Netflix series, as you know, some might call it silly or whatever, it's an amazing idea to be able to see what goes on inside. And who knows, like, there could be more with all the connections that Liberty have as far as distribution and whatnot and partnerships are concerned, you know. Give us some more F1 movies, perhaps, you know. That'll be great to see.
Yeah, they're just getting started.
Moving it on, Zach Brown was on hand, of course, with McLaren this weekend. It was his first time linking up with Walkinshaw Andretti United in the supercars category, and I guess he had a bit to say too about the future of that sport too, saying that, you know, why don't we invest in hybrids rather than switching to V6 turbocharged engines, which Holden will be introducing for next season, saying that it's a bit of a waste of money and he's got to find a way of being relevant to road cars, which hybrid engines are. And of course, what was the other point? Oh yeah, that's right. Making it so that it's still training up young engineers and developing innovation and all that. So what do we think? Hybrids in V8 supercars?
Yeah, he's certainly, I guess, coming from the F1 background, he has that knowledge. It's ruffled a few feathers with Roland Dane, with 888 now, the factory Holden team homologating the recent chassis, which we've seen. Next season, the V6 will come online. We might see some wildcard entries in the back half of this season, so he's probably not most pleased with this idea of maybe a split in categories, multiple tiers, if we did have some cars retaining what has been the status quo for the past couple of decades or so, and the V6 is being seen as a future which probably doesn't have any real relevance to the Australian market, but I think Zach Brown's got a point, as long as it's done in a way that's not going to blow the budget out of the water.
Exactly, so it's good to hear Zach talking about supercars, of course, now involved with that Walkinshaw team through his United Autosports outfit. And I guess the next piece of news as well, linked to United Autosports, is Juan Pablo Montoya going to be contesting the 24-hour Le Mans this year, his quest for the Triple Crown. Of course, he's won the Monaco Grand Prix, he's won the Indy 500 several times, so now it's Le Mans that he's got to tick off and win that one, so he can be the second man behind Graham Hill to have completed the Triple Crown.
Yeah, I guess he's eyeing that off with Fernando Alonso. It's in the not too distant future. He's got his own designs, and a lot of, not just Montoya for the Triple Crown, but a lot of drivers showing some receptiveness to even the supercars, especially with this collaboration. Zach Brown, a bit of a conduit there. He's many strings he can pull, can put people in places, and we might be seeing these international stars on a supercars grid at Bathurst and the like in the foreseeable future. Well,
you were saying earlier that Stoffel Vandoorne's expressed his interest to race at Bathurst one day, so perhaps Zach could put him in touch with the Walkinshaw guys to make that happen. Fernando Alonso, of course, and of course the Penske link that
Alex
is
Rossi
there with
Michael Andretti's son.
Yeah, so pretty much, you know, that's, I guess, where the benefit is of having these partnerships between outfits. And we heard Erebus Motorsport too in the lead up to the new season saying that they're investigating a potential partnership with someone stateside as well. So, you know, I guess it's viable. It helps them economically and on a business perspective as well. I mean, Penske in particular, they've got, you know, their Penske Empire, the trucking business and everything, which is present here in Australia too. So it is of benefit two ways, I guess. It works both ways for them.
Yeah, you can just see that globalization. As long as it's not saturating the market, we've always got to have the priority given to the local stars who have cut their teeth for so long, but any time that you can expand it to a new market, you've got to pursue it.
Exactly. So I guess that wraps up our motorsport content for now. We'll talk a little bit later as well when we do our new thing, a sporting moment of the week. So that's basically where we just talk about anything that's our highlight of the week, whether it's in motorsport, footy, cricket, whatever. But before we get into that, I guess the whole world of sport this week was rocked by what happened in South Africa with the Australian cricket team. We don't really talk a lot of cricket apart from when it's the Ashes, but I guess this was significant enough for us to sort of weigh in on it and share our thoughts, because it has been following us for the entire week, basically.
Basically cast a shadow over from when it occurred early hours Sunday morning. It put the Grand Prix on the back burner. Even everyone in the paddock, all they could talk about was what happened over in South Africa.
With the cricket, yeah. So the fact that, Monday morning the Australian Grand Prix was relegated to the back pages where, this cricket scandal was the main thing. And I guess for those, I'm sure you all are aware what happened there. The Australian team involved in a ball tampering situation. 3 players have been banned. The coach has resigned. Amongst the 3 players, the captain himself, Steve Smith, a massive fall from grace for him. Cameron Bancroft, the youngster, who's only had a handful of tests in his pocket, and of course the vice captain David Warner, who many believe to be the architect of this. But I guess just sharing a few thoughts. There's no better word to put it as disappointing, and perhaps it's an understatement as well. It's almost heartbreaking to think that, for a country that's so proud of its sporting heritage, and in particular cricket, where, being captain of the test team is second to the job of the Prime Minister in Australia, it is a big letdown, isn't it?
I'd say, if anything, it was shocking but not surprising, considering that culture that's been festering away for decades, really. You go back to leaderships, Clark, Ponting, Wall, they all had lines. Some of them would really push it, other ones would step over from time to time, and on this occasion, with the certain individuals involved, it doesn't take much. You get that inertia and things start happening, people start taking more control, and in this case, there's been a real breakdown, certainly between those involved and higher end with Darren Lehman in this case. Whether he did have any prior knowledge or not, he's now also fallen on his sword, and it just shows you that until Australia can now move forward, that it's probably been a long time coming, and just doesn't take away ultimately, though, from the shame that we feel collectively.
Yeah, exactly. But going back to what you're saying about the culture, which has sort of been festering away over the last few years or whatever, how did it get to a stage where it was like that? Cricket's one of those sports, I guess, if you're cynical like me, you've really doubted cricket for the last decade or whatever, ever since IPL came on board, and we see various spot fixing and ball tampering scandals all over the world.
Particularly your own interest, I guess, on the Pakistan scene. It's a lot more afflicted by these scandals in the past.
Yeah,
so jaded by the whole process eventually.
So a country like a team like Australia that have always represented the highest of sporting integrity and playing, having a fair go and playing fairly or whatever, even though their behaviour might not be that reflecting that, but they always played with the highest level of honour and prestige or whatever. To not have that anymore as well, it's just like, well, what's the point then? You've not had the behaviour over the last few years, as some have described. It's been quite boorish, and of course, a lot of those tensions in the Test series with South Africa at the moment was built up because of certain players' behaviours and whatnot on field and off field. It's kind of not surprising, as you say, that it's reached this situation, and of course really disappointing for a young player to get involved in that, where he's sort of peer pressured into doing it to keep his spot in the side. So where do they go from here? It's pretty clear, I guess, just trying to change that culture. New leaders will come in. They've got, I guess, the standing captain at the moment, Tim Payne. After this series is done, there'll be a new coach as well, who I'm sure they'll announce in due course or whatever. Plenty of candidates out there. But yeah, Steve Smith, it's just, someone that a lot of people look up to, well, kids look up to, because he's the Test captain and someone who's been a role model. He's always had that reputation of being a clean skin and being, almost childlike in the way. There's an innocence,
like a little puppy just
there was a weird innocence about him, which, I guess, and it sort of was on display yesterday when we saw that press conference where he pretty much broke down and was full-on apologetic about what had transpired, and he took full responsibility for it. And in a way, like, it was hard not to be disappointed and angry with him initially, but then seeing those emotions come out and seeing him essentially take, and Cameron Bancroft to an extent, taking the bullets in this situation, taking the flak, just goes to show you the leadership qualities. And of course, Smith's leadership has been questioned a lot over the last few years, and I guess that was the biggest act of leadership that he's had to go through, and stand up for his team, take the full responsibility, even though many have suggested it wasn't exactly his. He was the one who instigated it. But it's just, I don't know. It's weird times, the fact that the Australian cricket team would get involved in something like this. This sort of stuff can happen anywhere, basically.
Oh, if there was one question mark about Smith's leadership over his tenure, it's probably that malleability to maybe not more senior, but those with more authority, in the sense that they get what they want. And clearly on this occasion he's been a bit naive, and you should have known that this was something which just should never have proceeded. So it's caught him short, and you can only hope that in the long run that he's got that 12 months as it is now of introspection, and he comes back as an even better, not just a cricketer, but as an individual. And I'm sure that all of the people involved had plenty of time to lick their wounds, and whoever chooses to make their own beliefs, whoever wants to come out and take ownership. Steve Smith on this occasion, he can't be faulted for saying that the buck has stopped with him in this instance.
Yeah, so I guess taking that onus upon himself to take the hit for the team, and it's only gonna make him a stronger person anyway. But he's still young. I'm sure 12 months later he will come back if he's still got the form behind him. Whether he'll be captain again is another story. I reckon perhaps if Australia don't find a better leader, that the opportunity is there for him. David Warner, I couldn't really care less about, to be honest, because he's the one who's sort of brought this toxic culture about. We all had to feel sorry for him, whatever, with what happened with Quinton de Kock, because he started talking about his wife or whatever. But the fact that was brought around was the fact that Warner was constantly mouthing off in the field to him during play. And there's a line that you can cross when it comes to sledging and whatnot, and bit of banter. And it seems, as we've said before, that the Australians for the last few years have just been the chiefs in crossing that line every time. And yeah, it just makes it an uncomfortable thing to view, and to consider that sport is absolutely preposterous.
At the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that Warner's been a great cricketer. Unfortunately, he probably had a couple of years of real stability there, and it seemed as though that family side really had made him a more balanced individual, but he's probably slipped back into those old habits, certainly through the Ashes campaign. And what the greater shame is, though, he seemed to really thrive in the leadership spotlight when he took on the limited overs and T20 captaincy there on that tour of New Zealand. It seemed as though he was really coming into his own. So to have regressed to here, it just makes the downfall even more disappointing. But the fact is that he's the instigator of it all, so he's going to be the one. As much as Smith was the leader, people will associate this, and he'll have forever black dot tarnished against his
Yeah,
name.
well, I wouldn't have him as captain. Like before, I didn't really want him as captain. Now, definitely, I wouldn't want to see him as captain.
He said that he's ineligible to ever captain an Australian international team upon his return if it does come to pass.
Yeah, got no humility or humbleness about him whatsoever, which is traits of a captain that you need. And just while we're still on the subject, a few years ago we heard Brendan McCullum, who was the former captain of New Zealand, come out and say that it should be played with humility and respect and all that, and the sledging and whatnot is unnecessary at times, and the Australian public basically shamed him and just called him basically a pussy for making those sort of comments. And when you look at it at the time and now looking at it in hindsight, it's like maybe he has a point. There is a line that when it comes to sport, a bit of banter is good, and we like to rub the salt in the wound a little bit, but don't get too carried away. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a game we're playing. We're playing it for fun. That's what we're taught when we're growing up, that we play sport for fun, to have fun, and learn things, learn experiences about life. Not take it to the point where, it's like, your wife is this and this, or you're this and this, or whatever,
Well, they all end up ultimately living on this pedestal where everything that goes on in their public and personal lives is in the public spectrum, essentially, and it's always monitored closely, and eventually the pressures can come one way or another, and in this instance, it's led to these events, and it's a culmination, really. It's over many months and years again, and on this occasion, it's... who knows, talking about other teams, whether they've done the exact same thing in the past. Australia, as far as its reputation in the past, whether it holds itself to a higher level of courtesy than the rest, this is the moment where they draw the line in the sand and, I guess, reinvent itself moving forward.
Yeah, they've got to. There's no doubt about that. So good luck, I guess, to the team with the final test in South Africa, which gets underway later today, I'm pretty sure. So we'll be watching that indeed. But yeah, I guess the enthusiasm does get a little curbed with what's happened and everything. But anyway, let's wrap up the podcast on a positive note. Sporting moment of the week. So every week we're going to pick out our favourite moment, whether it's in motorsport or in any other sport. And I guess it's hard to pick out anything in cricket this week, to be honest. But what stood out for you over the last week in the world of sport? We had footy come back round one. I'm not going to say that Collingwood was your favourite moment, but
no, certainly nothing to do with football. I'd honestly say, sticking on the cricket theme, just seeing Steve Smith there at the press conference last night, showing that he's just a human like everybody, and there was nothing scripted about his performance there, no stage management, and also to a lesser extent, Darren Lehman, the effect he felt seeing Smith and Cameron Bancroft with their conferences. It moved him to, after 24 hours where he said he would be continuing, to also announce his resignation, that these guys, they're affected like everybody, and they can see in their own degrees of complicitness that it's time to move on and just reflect on what happened, but we need to give them all a break eventually. But it's just good to see that it wasn't some sort of robotic response of just saying, oh, sorry, it won't happen again. They genuinely owned their sentiments.
Yeah, so I guess, what you said about Darren Lehman, just feeling that it was time to move on amongst all that, and Steve Smith, nothing scripted about that at all. But for me, I guess, not going off cricket and back to motorsport, actually. We didn't talk really about supercars over the weekend with the championship round, of course. But for me, my favourite moment of the week was Scott Pye breaking through for his first win in supercars. He's had 165 races, and finally, to be able to do it, it was a tough race. It was changeable conditions. It was getting dark there at Albert Park Saturday night. And he had Jamie Whincup, the seven-time champion, behind him, and just the composure to hold himself in the lead and to be able to do it. And this is a guy who's faced so much adversity throughout his career. He's been dumped from so many teams, not particularly of his own fault, but He's just been unlucky. He's been in a lot of accidents. But finally, we're seeing that mature Scott Pye come out, the talented Scott Pye that we've all been hoping to see succeed. And now, with the new Walkinshaw Andretti United team, for him to break through for the first win of that alliance, only into the second round of the championship, is quite warming to see. And yeah, if they keep the faith in him, then we could yet have a champion in Scott Pye.
Well, finally he's got that stability instead of being bandied about and being that second option when someone else decides that it's too hard to get their head around something. He's now got a place where he feels like he belongs, and he's got the backing there. People want to invest into him, and as far as being the future there, he's certainly got it all ahead.
Yeah, so, we'll talk more about supercars next time. But, yeah, great weekend anyway for the category there, racing for championship points. Shane Van Gisbergen retains the lead despite having a bit of an off weekend. But, yeah, it's going to be a close one. We had 4 different winners across the weekend and 5 winners across the first 6 races, which is good to see, with David Reynolds also winning the last race, there at Albert Park, Scott McLaughlin winning one, and Jamie Whincup getting on the board too. So another interesting year lies ahead for supercars as well. But as far as this week's podcast is concerned, thank you very much for tuning in. A bit somber, of course, with the cricket news and whatnot, but hopefully normal service will resume next week, where we can talk wall-to-wall motorsport and maybe a bit of footy, depending on how things go for your team this round. My team has already lost in the North Queensland Cowboys, so I'm definitely not going to be talking about them unless you want me to break down like Steve Smith did. But anyway, let's wrap things up. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.
Pleasure as always. Until then.